Alrighty, we are going live. It was loading. It should be good in like 5 seconds. I'm sorry.
Shall I start, Dana?
Yes.
Can
Hello, everyone.
Yep. Go ahead. Chanel, you have a question?
can someone drop the link in the chat for people to watch? I'll send it to my friends and family.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the MSU Science Festival. My name is Chelsea Boodoo, and I will be your moderator today. We are joined by Dr. Sandra Logan and Dr. Dana Kirk, as well as their lab members. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll let you take it from here.
Welcome to the 2021 Science Fest webinar on catastrophe and sustainability. My name is Sandra Logan. I'm a professor in the Department of English in the College of Arts and Letters.
Hi, and I'm Dana Kirk, an associate professor in Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering.
Dana and I joined forces to teach a course in 2019 on food waste, a real-world global problem with significant economic, environmental, and humanitarian implications. We taught it as a combined integrative studies in the arts and humanities and integrative studies in the biological sciences course, because the topic cuts across humanistic, scientific, and technological fields. More importantly, as Dana recognized, we have the technological capability to nearly eliminate food waste, but without human understanding of the problem and solutions, without the desire to eliminate waste, it's difficult to put technological solutions in place. So we not only taught students about food waste as a wicked problem that requires a multi-pronged approach, we structured our class to address the values, perceptions, and understanding that would motivate people to take up and support the available solutions, change their behavior, and help to put an end to food waste. As we planned the course for spring of 2021 to teach it a second time, COVID hit, and we saw a lot of impact on the food supply chain, with waste increasing and people's access to food diminishing. So we decided to pivot the course to focus more on food access, food security, and social justice, as well as the impacts of COVID on both suppliers and consumers. The students in this course have created this presentation to document their learning and to call attention to the problems of food waste, its solutions, and the ways we can motivate people to take on the challenges food waste presents.
From a learning standpoint, when it comes to the food system, we spent a tremendous amount of time talking about the food supply chain and associated food loss and waste, or FLW. And so the class really kind of decomposed our food production into agricultural production, post-harvest, handling and storage, processing, distribution, and consumption. And again, looking at kind of traditional food loss and waste, and this is pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, we see big differentiations between low-income and high-income countries in where food loss and food waste occur. In low income, it's much earlier in the supply chain at production and in harvesting and handling, and much less at consumption or consumer level. The opposite's true for medium and high income countries, where we see lots of food waste and loss occurring at the user or the consumer end, and much smaller components or losses occurring throughout the remaining part of the supply chain. We also spent a lot of time talking about the goals and the opportunities to reduce this loss, reduce these inefficiencies around food. Of course, it's very similar to when we think about reducing and conserving energy or recycling. Prevention of waste, of course, is the easiest, and that's why it's the biggest component of this inverted triangle. So as consumers, we have lots of opportunity to prevent food waste in the choices we make and how we use our food. The next tier a priority would be reuse, finding ways that we could take surplus food or food that is not going to be consumed in either transforming it and getting it into opportunities for other people to consume it, to address poverty or food access issues. Recycle, again, moving it into animal feed or some other beneficial reuse. Composting is another option here. Recovery would be the next tier on the triangle. And this would be, recovering energy and fertilizer. So in some cases, these are interchangeable or could be inverted, but recycling and recovery are kind of after human consumption and human poverty issues would be the next ideal areas to utilize food waste in. And again, this could be animal feeds, it could be compost and fertilizer, it could be energy production. The bottom and kind of the least desirable management option for food waste is disposal. And so this would be sending it to a landfill, sending it to a wastewater treatment plant, incineration or something along that lines. And again, it has the least benefit to society, has the least positive environmental impacts, and really is just simply as this disposal. There's no really beneficial opportunity to reuse food waste in that area. And so from a technological standpoint, again, the class thought a lot about where this food waste is occurring in the supply chain. How can we use this inverted triangle to prioritize ways to reduce that food waste? And then again, combining it with kind of the social dynamic to understand how do we motivate people to start to apply some of these principles and some of these opportunities to improve the situation around food waste. The following presentation is going to walk through some of these focus areas for the class. And so it's going to be divided up into essentially 3 team segments. First, kind of outlining the problem and the challenges around food waste, then looking at solutions to the problem, and then talking about motivations and how can we implement some of the solutions and motivate change in society to improve on the situation, reduce the inefficiency, and create an overall more desirable situation with food for society. So with that, we'll let the students take over. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mallory Marvin, and today Antonio, Louie, Andy, and I are here to inform you about the problems in the supply chain resulting in food waste. On the next slide are some current problems in production. Production food loss is defined as the food waste that occurs along the entire spectrum of production, from the farm to distribution to the table. I found it very alarming that 28% of the world's agricultural land that is used for producing food is never consumed, because this waste, as you see on the right, piles up in landfills and creates greenhouse gases, which contribute to global warming. On the topic of production food waste, it's mind-blowing that 14% of the world's agricultural food never makes it to market. And this could be factors because of mold, pest, and spoilage. When COVID-19 hit America, producers experienced extreme demand loss, and it caused Ohio farmers to dump 1,200,000 gallons of jugs of fresh milk into manure pits each day. Since food service operations like schools and restaurants were closing, not demanding as much from producers, this created much food waste. Farmers can't change demand and are responsible for disposing of the food waste that otherwise normally would be distributed to food service operations. This chart is a nice visual of the food that is wasted. As you can see, dairy, deli, and bakery make up the largest at 38%, while fruits and veggies make up the second largest at 19% because they spoil easier than processed foods and have a shorter shelf life. COVID-19 has created many problems for producers. In livestock operations, animals don't stop producing, eating, or growing. So farmers are dumping 3.7 million gallons of milk each day and smashing 750,000 eggs every week. Farmers are throwing away their goods, wasting their time, their energy, and their labor costs in the entire supply chain. The COVID-19 pandemic has significantly increased waste for producers who rely on food service. A New York Times article found that consumers are less likely to eat vegetables compared to vegetables prepared at a restaurant. With food service operations closing, it is changing habits in household cooking and customer buying habits. In the picture below, you can see the percentage of food waste at every level before the pandemic. Farms and processing make up 30% of the waste. Customers make up almost half at 47%. Food waste is a global problem that's happening all over the world. And at the production level in underdeveloped countries, it's because of spoilage and lack of equipment and technology, which causes food to be inedible. But in developed countries, it's because of overproduction, which is causing good food to go to waste. In the next slide, Antonio will talk about consumer complications.
Thank you, Mallory. I'm here to talk with you today about food waste at the consumer level. When most people hear the term food waste involving consumers, they may think of young kids throwing away carrots their mother packed for them, or an ice cream cone that someone accidentally dropped on the ground. These are valid examples of food waste involving consumers. However, we throw away much more food, perfectly edible food, than we are aware of. Based on estimates by the NDRC, or the National Resource Defense Council, the average American throws away close to 200 pounds of food at home annually. And when conducting a survey, they found that 75% of surveyed Americans believe they wasted less than that 200-pound average, which is a statistical impossibility. Furthermore, the USDA estimated that 31% of food loss is at the retail and consumer level, yet for most people, food waste isn't even on their radar. To put this more into perspective, the USDA estimated that consumer waste amounts to about $124 billion per year, or about $1,600 per year per family of four. And that's a lot of cash to be throwing in the garbage, if you ask me. Food waste also has a dramatic impact on the environment, which Louis will talk about next.
Food waste causes environmental impacts such as contributing to global warming through greenhouse gases. Each year, 1.6 billion tons of food is turned into food waste, approximately 33.2% of the total food produced each year. If incinerated, it would produce roughly 586 million tons of CO2. Through the production to disposal of food, the food waste will release at least 113 million metric tons of CO2 each year, which is equivalent to 2% of the US national average. About 2/3 of the emissions occur in the production and processing of the food. And food waste around the world contributes or is responsible for around 6% of the total global greenhouse gas emissions. The majority of food waste ends up in landfills or being incinerated, both generating greenhouse gases. Out of all the materials that get sent to landfills, food waste is the largest material. It takes about 24% of the total materials. Food waste that ends up in landfills, when it's in an anaerobic environment, is broken down by bacteria to produce methane gas, which is about 25 times more damaging than CO2 for the environment. And the EPA states that landfills with food waste is the third largest producer of methane gas in the US. This is the environmental impacts of food waste during regular years. It's become worse due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which Andy will talk about further.
Okay, so how the pandemic has intensified food waste. Food waste and food insecurity have been continuous problems that are faced globally, and these issues have only been intensified by COVID-19 since the beginning of 2020. An example of this can be seen with the journal published on the U.S. National Library of Medicine and National Institutes of Health. And it states that between the months of February and August of 2020, according to the first example, there was a increase in global food prices, which can be seen within the 7.1% increase in rice, the 7% price increase in the meat of cattle, 5.5% for the meat of chicken, and 8.3% for the price of potatoes. This increase in global food prices does not only hurt consumers as food accessibility becomes more difficult, but it also worsens overall food insecurity. Along with this price increase, food waste has also been seen to increase within only the first 3 weeks of the shutdown, and the shutdowns caused panic within consumers, leading to the overconsumption of goods and resources, while a portion of these goods would end up going to waste due to expiration dates and or leftovers. And another way food waste was intensified that can be seen within the last example of the slide is through surpluses. And shutdowns of places such as schools and restaurants led to a decrease in distribution led to a decrease in distribution of food demanded for these specific infrastructures, while increasing overall demand for the distribution of food demanded to households. And an example of the shutdown causing surplus can be seen within the dairy industry, as when major consumers of dairy products like ice cream shops, coffee shops, and restaurants closed for shutdown, the dairy industry faced a surplus in milk as cows still needed to be tended to. And as the demand decreased for these areas, the supply of dairy products continued to flow, which ultimately led to becoming wasted.
Now we're going to talk to you about some solutions to the problems that were previously addressed. These solutions involve technology, business, and policy, as well as involving households in the effort to mitigate food waste.
So a huge contributor to food waste is the fact that perfectly edible food is being tossed into landfills. Landfills are used for so many more things than food, while food can actually be used somewhere else and given to those who actually need it, those who are food insecure. Not only is food in landfills wasteful, but it's also contributing to the issue of global warming. This problem has had some awareness spread around as more and more states are continuously trying to get laws passed to prevent food from being sent to landfills. These laws will help free up space in landfills for things other than food and decrease the emissions that are driving climate change. Stepping aside from the issue of landfills, the process of redistribution is a must to help stop food waste. This is an extremely important move to be making right now so that perfectly edible food isn't just going to waste. A solution is to create programs that will work to regulate and reduce the amount of agricultural waste and save leftover food on farms and redistribute it to those in need. But stepping away from redistributing on-farm products, people can help redistribute food by donating it to those in need around their own communities. Another huge contributor to food waste is consumers not knowing correct information. An example is regarding expiration dates, as these often cause confusion as to when food has actually gone bad. There are different categories of food labels, such as expires on or best if used by, but consumers don't normally understand exactly what these labels mean, and often the way of labeling dates is inconsistent. This then leads to consumers wasting perfectly edible food. This is why a solution is needed through a standardized way of labeling food. One of the only foods that's actually required to have expiration dates on the product is baby formula. All other expiration dates are actually entirely up to the manufacturer and what they choose to put on the label. This leads us to ask the question, how can we change the way labels work? The Senator of Connecticut is actually calling for a new bill that will require food labels to be federally regulated. This bill would clear up all the confusion for consumers by fully explaining what each label means. Foods will be labeled on both safety and quality. Expires on will refer to food safety, and best if used by will refer to food quality. So this is still safe to eat, it just may not taste as good as it once did. This bill's goal is to provide accurate information about expiration dates so that they can know if their food has really gone bad or not. The aim is to have consumers cut down on their waste through educating them with proper information on when their food has actually reached its expiration. But while we wait on this bill to prevent food waste and laws to stop food from going to landfills, consumers can play an active role in reducing their own waste, which Grace will now cover.
So what can you do to help as a consumer to better food waste inside of your home? The first is by being mindful of storage. This includes cleaning spills to prevent the spread of bacteria onto fresh, edible food. Furthermore, seal all of your foods tightly to prevent moisture and bacteria. Keeping foods at the right temperature is also vital so that they don't go bad. Lastly, keep food out at a minimum of 2 hours to prevent spoilage. Secondly, it's important to label and organize your fridge in a way that makes sense to you. For example, if you put foods that are going bad sooner at the front, it will remind you to use those foods up first. Secondly, different label dates mean different things, such as best by and used by, so keep that in mind when organizing your fridge. Next, trying new recipes is a great way to be creative and use up possible leftover foods. For example, foods that might not be as appealing to the eye are great for smoothies and soups. When it comes to portions, only serve or take what you'll eat to ensure you're not throwing away good food. So what can you do to help as a consumer to better food waste inside of your home? The first is by being mindful of storage. This includes cleaning spills to prevent the spread of bacteria onto fresh, edible food. Furthermore, seal all of your foods tightly to prevent moisture and bacteria. Keeping foods at the right temperature is also really important so that they don't go bad. Lastly, keep foods out at a minimum of 2 hours to prevent spoilage. Secondly, it's important to label and organize your fridge in a way that makes sense to you. For example, if you put foods that are going bad sooner at the front, it will remind you to use those foods up first. Secondly, different label dates mean different things, such as Best By and News Buy, so keep that in mind when you're organizing your fridge. Next, trying new recipes is a great way to be creative and use up possible leftover foods. For example, foods that might not be as appealing to the eye are great for smoothies and soups. When it comes to portions, only serve or take what you'll eat to ensure you're not throwing away good food. Finally, anything you don't finish or use is perfect for donating. Look into local food drives for nonprofits for more opportunities. As a consumer outside of your household, there are also many more steps you can take to help prevent food waste. For example, grocery shopping is a big thing. As a consumer, you can prevent food waste not only when you're home, but also outside of your home in your community. Bulk buying is something to be mindful of. The price is great, but make sure you're not buying unnecessary amounts of foods that won't be used or in the amount of time needed before expiration. Ugly foods is a term we use to describe marked foods such as bumps or bruises. These foods are still perfectly edible, but most consumers avoid them, and they end up being left on the shelves to go to waste. Try going out of your way to buy these foods so they're not thrown away. My next point is about restaurants. Like myself, it can be easy to get stuck in a routine of eating at the same places. However, try researching new places to eat that make an effort to help the environment. It's fun and you're helping make a difference. Lastly, if you don't finish a meal, ask the restaurant for takeout boxes. Almost every restaurant has them, and they're great for storing in your fridge or freezer to extend its life and further prevent waste.
There are many businesses and organizations that you can support who value reducing food waste. A couple of the businesses and organizations that focus on using overproduced food that would otherwise go wasted include Zero Waste Restaurants, Retail Apps, and Fair Share. Zero Waste Restaurants provide consumers a unique culinary experience by creating dishes using the parts of crops that traditionally get wasted. There are retail apps for consumers that allow you to buy imperfect produce or food that is near the sell-by date from the retailers that would most likely otherwise go wasted. And you can get these products for discounted prices. For example, Myers has an application called Flash Food that lets local consumers buy items that are near the sell-by date for up to 50% off. And then Fair Share is a nonprofit organization that rescues overproduced food and also uses donated food and food that they grow from their own garden to create and distribute nutritious meals for people in need. A couple businesses and organizations that focus on recycling food to feed people and animals includes Japan's Animal Feed Program, bread to beer companies, and bakeries such as Bakery Pomponet. Japan's food recycling industry takes food that would otherwise be wasted and turns it into animal feed. This also saves them on the cost of feed and fertilizer, which is about 50% more expensive. Taste testers also have found that feeding animals recycled food enhances the profile flavor. Bread to beer companies such as Toasted Ale in New York recycle surplus bread to make beer. And in France, they throw out more than 150,000 metric tons of bread every year, which is enough for each citizen to have 9 loaves. So Bakery Pomponet started using a machine called the crumbler to grind stale baguettes into breadcrumbs that can replace flour, which they can recycle back into making more bread. So to make an impact on food waste reduction, you can actively seek out and utilize businesses and organizations like the ones I've just mentioned.
When looking to reuse foods as a consumer, it is important to know that you have a few options. Those who are food insecure or in need can benefit from foods that households do not have use for anymore. Food kitchens are a great way to reuse food. Food kitchens accept forms of food such as canned goods, rice, and pasta. Food banks provide families with access to healthy foods. A statistic from Feeding America states that food bank network members of Feeding America supply food to more than 37 million Americans each year, including 14 million children and 3 million seniors. By donating foods to places that help those that are insecure, these statistics can be reduced. Composting is also another great way to reuse excess food scraps. Composting reduces the production of methane, a greenhouse gas that is emitted from landfills. This reduction aids in global warming and climate change in a positive way. Composting also reduces the need for fertilizers because of the soil produced by composting bins. Composting provides an overall cost savings for individuals who choose to compost, in part because there is no need to purchase conventional soil or technologies that would remedy water and air pollution. Masha will now delve deeper into composting.
Similar to what Gabby just mentioned on a consumer level, it's also important to look at the opportunities we have for composting on a larger scale. Like previously mentioned, not everyone currently has access to a composter at home, whether they live in a big city or in an apartment. It's just not feasible for everyone. A lot of waste also occurs before a product reaches the consumer. Composting can be done not only on a farm, but in a variety of different industries. That is because compost can be made from any organic material. Listed below are a number of different wastes that occur in a bunch of different industries. There are a bunch of different methods for composting, the most popular being the aerated pile method, and this is because it is pretty cheap and pretty simple. Basically, materials sit in long piles above ground and decompose over a period of time, and that is the picture that is listed below. And the byproducts that come from that are carbon dioxide, water, minerals, and of course, compost. Another efficient method of composting is anaerobic digestion. As you can see on the chart, this is a very simplified version of anaerobic digestion. It's not too different from other methods of composting, but it occurs in the digester with a lack of oxygen. Waste goes in and two byproducts come out. For biogas, it takes all of the gas that is released from the organic material and it traps it to be used for further powering homes or fueling public transportation and maybe even someday airplanes. The rest is digestate, and this can be further used for composting and fertilizer. This is beneficial because if placed back into normal composters, such as the picture before, it speeds up the process and decreases the need for extra liquids. To look on a more local level, it was reported that in the year 2020, Michigan produced 3.1 million tons of food waste per year. The very thought that this could potentially create about 17 million cubic feet of renewable energy each year is very exciting and creates a lot of opportunities. To optimize all of our food waste, 423 new systems can be implemented, which comes along with roughly 10,000 new job opportunities. A cool fact is that we actually have our very own anaerobic digester here on campus. It takes food waste from the dining halls to power many of the buildings on South Campus. Like I mentioned previously before, as did Gabby, there are a number of benefits to composting. Composting has been around for such a long time, and it's not really hard to see why. The first reason is obviously because we're turning something that otherwise would have been trash into something that is incredibly useful. This saves a lot of money because companies need to spend less on external resources. Because of this, there are a number of economic benefits. You save a lot of money on resources and disposal fees. Farmers save a lot of money on chemical fertilizers because composting creates incredibly nutritious soil. If you look at the picture on the right, you can see the plant that is planted in a number of mediums. On the left side, you have the control, and then on the right, you have compost. On the right, you can see that the plant is a lot more nutritious, and this creates a much higher quality product, which creates higher customer satisfaction. Not only are there economic benefits, but most importantly, there's a huge environmental aspect to it. Similarly to what is said a few slides before, landfills with food waste are some of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases in the country. And food waste will never 100% be eradicated, so it's important that we have as little of our food ending up in the landfills as possible, and we have solutions that are able to take care of this. Now I'll turn it over to Sophie, who will talk a little bit more about policy.
So policy is another great tool on the toolkit to tackle the issue of food waste. Implementing policies coupled with increasing infrastructure is a very effective method of increasing awareness and also providing really important solutions. Organic waste bans are one way to do this. They're oftentimes targeted both at households and industrial producers. It kind of just depends on the policy and the state. Some East Coast states have put organic waste bans in place so far. And later in this presentation, you'll hear some examples and about how these laws have happened and what the motivations are behind them. These laws can vary, like I said, greatly depending on the state and who is targeted and how strict the laws are, though a common theme is banning the disposal of waste in landfills if there's a better way of disposal, such as recycling or composting. And these can actually extend to recyclables as well. Organic waste recycling laws are another way to go about reducing food waste that ends up in landfills. Some states have this where industrial producers must compost or anaerobically digest their waste, so this is also where infrastructure would be helpful. This is good because it makes food waste into a commodity such as compost or energy, and rather than just letting food go to waste in a landfill where it decomposes very, very slowly and doesn't really do anything. One last way of combating food waste with policy is implementing curbside composting policies. These are more kind of municipal level policies targeted at households and maybe some small businesses as well. This could make composting pickup accessible to the general public, just as like curbside garbage and recycling pickup is accessible. This could ingrain the mentality of separating food waste out from other waste, and it also really just makes people cognizant of how much food waste they generate. So kind of having people make that mental connection there. San Francisco is one of the municipalities that has implemented a policy like this, and they actually estimated that about 1/3 of food waste in landfills could be composted. So that's a really large fraction. And so, I mean, as we've already established many times in this presentation, reducing input to landfills can very much reduce landfill emissions, which is a big thing for the environment. Next, Chanel will talk about technology.
Innovative technologies have been pivotal in reducing food waste from the supply side of the chain. Technologies such as Clean Corp technologies, which specialize in eco-friendly treatment harvest crops, which seek to safely remove molds and toxins, allows products to last longer and be safer for consumption. AgroSustain also specializes in pre- and post-harvest biological treatments, which also seek to prevent mold from attacking crops and thus preventing food waste. Lastly, Wheat Sheaf is specializing in ozone technology to help reduce food waste in shipping containers when distributing to consumers. Finally, we can tackle multiple issues at once by going directly to the government and asking for agricultural input subsidies. By supplying local farmers with subsidies, it lowers the cost of producing food, which directly provides support to farmers who have been strongly impacted by the pandemic. Subsidies are shown to improve agricultural productivity in lower and middle income countries, allowing for economic growth in countries that need it most. Providing subsidies has also demonstrated that it affects the consumer level as well, resulting in positive results in nutrition and related health, since healthier goods become more readily available and inexpensive to the mass public. The graph provided demonstrates all the areas that providing subsidies affect. By providing subsidies, production becomes cheaper, which in turn creates cheaper products for consumers to enjoy. That in turn provides more income to the households, which allows them to change their food consumption and begin eating healthier. Cheaper production also affects government revenue to create focus towards healthy living, the environment, and can even focus on food waste. More access to funds allows farmers to allocate funds to other areas of production, such as reducing waste and investing in technologies to help redistribute foods that otherwise would go to waste.
To recap, it is vital to note the importance of the solutions that are possible when it comes to food waste. A great way to start would be to make sure that edible food is not being thrown out and brought to landfills. This contributes to growing landfills and greenhouse gas emissions, leading to global warming. Next, awareness of programs that regulate and reduce waste through redistribution plays a big role in reducing food waste, as well as donating foods to your local food banks, shelters, and those in need. It is also important to educate communities of the meaning of the expiration dates and household level reuse, such as composting. Another great way to promote reuse at a household level is to support businesses who reuse, such as zero waste restaurants. Lastly, policies, subsidies, and technologies play a large role in getting the ball rolling towards reducing food waste. This is done through policies that target waste bans and compost, subsidies that lower input costs for production, and technologies that aid in safe production and transportation of foods.
So we learned about the problem of food waste, and we see that solutions exist or could exist. But how can we successfully implement these solutions? To reduce waste, we need to motivate people across the food supply chain to make the choices that will lead to change. For example, those who are in the earlier steps of production are going to be more motivated by economical benefits than environmental ones when it comes to reducing food waste. And consumers, while they're still concerned with economics, are more likely to be swayed by emotional appeals. So wouldn't it be better to just take this excess food and just feed it to the hungry rather than sending it off to the landfills?
Like Kayla just mentioned, we just presented you with a lot of problems around the food waste crisis and a lot of solutions that could be possible. So how do we turn that from just idea and make change out of it? We create a movement, right? We're trying to start a movement. And to do that, we need support. And so off of that basis, we are trying to work off of the fact that people will naturally want to do the right thing. But we have to make it easier for them to act on that desire, right? So it all begins with awareness and spreading awareness within the members of a given community or at each level of the food production chain or any other level within the food production industry. We have to start raising awareness at every single level. And with that, we can use that as a foundation and create motivation from it and get people to actually act on their internal desires to do better. And with that foundation, if we can educate those people that are now aware of the food waste crisis, then we can convince them that the footprint that we're leaving behind is actually really dangerous and that there needs to be change. So with consumers that are able to be educated now, consumers that are aware of the problems and consumers that can do better, we can influence larger and larger levels of the food production chain and lead everyone to change, lead everyone to start making a difference and lead everyone to start changing. So while we're motivating people, it's really hard to get people to actually take action. And that's where political change, policy change, as we mentioned in the solutions team, can actually make a really big difference. And whether that's a policy change that involves spending or allocating funds to whatever type of program can help start change, or making actual regulations with policies that enforce people to follow that form of change. No matter which way we go with any type of policy changes, we need support from the people. And in order to have support, we need education and we need awareness. And with that awareness and education and maybe some political help, we can actually start change. And then Sydney here is going to talk to you more about the political side of it.
So as we've mentioned, it's hard to motivate everybody to reduce their food waste. Most people want to help, but it's hard to know what steps to take, as Michael said. But when legal action and policy change is implemented, it can motivate more people to follow that common goal of reducing food waste. And so if we go on to the next slide, I'm going to do a deeper dive of the kind of laws that have been implemented. So right here, we have an example of the Vermont recycling bill. The Vermont recycling bill bans certain items from the trash and has recycling as a requirement for all of residents of Vermont. And this is a really great infographic because not only is it a law that has been implemented, but now we have an infographic that consumers can look at, they can see what's going on, exactly what they need to do, and this spreads awareness through education. Because, you know, we have this law, but not everybody will know what to do with it. So this infographic is actually sent out to consumers. It is posted around cities, and it really helps people know what they're actually getting into and be able and motivated to actually make change because they have those resources and education available to them. So more on some laws for recycling and to reduce food waste. In the state of California, they have mandated composting for both consumers and businesses, and composting bins are given to residents. This is a huge motivator for people to compost and reduce their food waste because they have these tools that are given to them. So this is, a great solution, but also a great motivator because these residents have these tools available to them and they're getting sent out, so they don't have to do much to make a difference. Maybe you had never thought about composting before. With tools like these, it shifts the responsibility without it being too much pressure on the consumer and can really motivate people to make change. So we already have a solution to the problem. Policy change is a great solution. And the next step is, like I said, having resources to learn about these changes and be inclined to follow new laws. Education is key, and having the resources available to you is also extremely important. An example of different motivators for consumers, citywide meetings are extremely important because they can get the entire community involved. You can ask questions, you can talk to your lawmakers and engage directly with them. And these are simple changes that can be made is what will incentivize people. It's easy and it's attractive. If you want to reduce your food waste, maybe you feel like there are so many steps you need to take, but when policy change is implemented and you have lawmakers and government officials spreading awareness and educating you on what to do, it becomes really easy for you to feel motivated and want to help. And now Jamar is going to tell us more about food waste.
So currently, there are over 500,000 homeless people in the U.S. alone that could benefit from better food access. Although food banks are a nice way to donate to malnourished communities, community gardens are better because they create rapport in the community. Community gardens also allow people to always have food available to them, so they don't have to depend as much on people donating to the food banks. So this graphic is fairly recent. It's from 2019 and shows the level of hunger in the world that could benefit from better food access. So as Sydney said earlier, there are laws, but not everybody knows what to do with them without being informed. Subliminals are important because they influence people's decisions on a regular basis. An example of this is the bystander effect, where people tend to do what they see others do. So one solution that could happen would be to incentivize consumers to donate food and seeds to grocery stores for discounts. This will make others want to do the same thing once it becomes more of a trend. Another way to lower food waste is getting legislature to make companies like Waste Management, for example, do a 3-to-3-to-1 ratio of composting bins to recycling bins to trash cans. This would also subliminally make people want to recycle and conserve more, as well as reuse more. With more people behind reducing food waste, it could be easier to push change via legislature through petitions, hearsay, etc. Now, Benji is going to talk to you about how to build awareness within the community.
So as for a personal side goes, a great way to start awareness is within your own life, is just setting the example for others, taking action personally. Where this can be the question of, I'm doing this because of this. I'm doing this because I think this is important. Buying from local grocery stores is another great way to help. It helps reduce prepackaged waste, which is another form of understanding awareness and understanding that it comes from a long process line and there's higher forms of it. We're supporting locally grown items and creating less waste through the use of reusable bags from those stores. Changing the attitude and the behavior of the consumer comes down to the basic question of why this is important. Because food waste is not something everyone cares 100%, you have to tailor to the different types of consumers, whether that is residential and commercial. Items like planning meals for the week is another great form of awareness. This way, you're not overbuying takeout and sets a schedule for you and your family. This also reduces the amount of extra waste that many restaurants use for storing food. Watching the quantity of food items you buy from big chain stores like Costco, buying what you will actually consume, carefully buying the appropriate amount of items, especially in small families. If you know you're not going to eat as much of something, it's simple, get less. And now Kayla is going to wrap it up.
So presenting research that is more relatable and personal to the consumer is going to be essential. Presenting research that is more relatable and personal to the consumer is going to be essential. Consumers can be overwhelmed or feel excluded individually from the problem with overarching statistics on food waste. This can make them question their role in the problem and more so their individual role in trying to reduce it. So information and concern needs to be presented with the consumer's perspective in mind. And how can we do this? We can do this by doing research observing consumer behavior and food habits. For example, in our own class, we measured our own food waste daily. And by observing our own habits, we saw an increase in both our awareness on waste and in our desire to eliminate the waste. So how can we motivate these consumers to do these changes? I think by doing these changes as economically viable will be appealing to the consumers. Like a solution mentioned earlier was education on labels, which can prevent unnecessary food loss and decrease trips to the grocery store, which saves money overall. Another change mentioned is reusing your food and using it efficiently by eating your food that's going to go bad sooner and making sure that you're eating less appealing foods by creating new recipes with them. I also think having consumers emotionally attached to these issues will appeal to them as well, such as the act of helping those in need. An example of this is donating your extra food to those in need, and this has always also helped reduce food waste. Especially during COVID, it has helped to continue to distribute food to those who are more food insecure than ever. So there needs to be this perception change on food. We need to stop viewing food waste as just waste, and we have to stop throwing it away without a thought. Throwing away this food leads to this excessive waste created, the buildup in landfills, and lower concern to how it contributes to environmental damage. We only want to see appealing food on our plates or growing perfectly in nature, unbruised and perfectly shaped. And if we keep ignoring food waste as an issue and our role in it, it can only get worse. So please look at this as an opportunity for change, an opportunity to be a part of a movement that will benefit you, help those in need, and improve the well-being of our planet. Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'd like to open the floor now for questions from the audience, but in the meantime, I know that the Facebook Live will have a few seconds of a delay, and we have some people here on Zoom. I personally really love this talk. I am always saying that we need to be more conscious about what we're buying. I actually get a lot of my food from a local farm. I was wondering, specifically with the Vermont example, I thought that that was very intriguing. How can we implement that in other states? I'm not sure if you all know that because that's a policy question, but I think it would be really amazing if we can actually implement that more.
I can answer that if that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead, Sophie.
Okay, so I mean, the biggest thing is just having people have the interest for it, right? Like, talk to your representatives and other lawmakers, and kind of reach out to people as well, neighbors and all that stuff, and just really you have to have the interest for it, right? So getting out there is the best way.
I agree. I think public awareness is really important with all of this. If the public would actually voice what they're thinking, what they're saying, I think that we would have a lot more advocates and a lot more things happening in regards to the policy realm. Do you have any advice for how we can even do this with children? Because I think this also starts at a young age too, because I am kind of embarrassed to say this. I didn't learn the difference with the sell by and best buy stuff till I got to college, actually.
Yeah, I think if I may step in now, I think the best way, we at the beginning of our course, we initially learned of various programs that were also going on that brought like food insecurity and like food recycling awareness to students. And it all starts with bringing it to your local schools, having clubs, teaching your children at home. You can start by having a garden and growing foods yourself, and then teaching them the importance of composting and starting recycling at your own household level, even if it doesn't become a nationwide thing. And take it from there. Now that you know from our presentation, you're like so welcome to like do more research and take it to your own households by implementing like gardens and just like education that are like fun for kids to do as well.
Yeah, Chanel, to follow up on what you said, I know that some people are quite intimidated by gardening. Some people will say, oh, I don't have a green thumb. I definitely can't grow that. And I'm personally from Miami, Florida, and I will say that growing plants in Michigan is much different than in Florida. So do you have any recommendations of easy things that people can start off with, or well, not just you in particular, like anyone on here, of some good plants that people can start off with that are edible that can help them feel more comfortable with the gardening realm?
You know, my grandma growing up always had a garden, and no one in my family could keep any plants alive whatsoever. But we found what I learned from my grandmother is the easiest plant to grow here in Michigan would definitely be tomatoes. It's such an easy like starting plant, takes minimal effort, isn't necessarily too picky. And grows great in our climate. So I'd say if anyone like wants to start getting involved, but is too intimidated to start with like a whole big garden with different vegetables and fruits and whatnot, tomatoes are like a great way to start small and start cheaply as well.
To piggyback off that, Chanel, too, also, like just saving food scraps, such as like the little ends off of lettuce and even the ends of green onion and stuff like that. And even potatoes are really easy. If you just like either put them in some water or bury them in dirt, you can just kind of, it can be a cool windowsill project for adults and for kids, because you can see the roots kind of grow.
If you've ever seen those 5-minute craft videos on Instagram, they're everywhere. They always show like how you can cut up a different vegetable or take the seed from a vegetable to grow your own like avocado plant at home. It's all over the internet.
Sweet potatoes as well. I'm actually growing a sweet potato right now. They're really easy. So
sweet potato has like a beautiful ivy that it creates too. It's really worth trying to make, as well as herbs too. Like herbs are a very easy thing to grow, as well as just in general, herbs go bad very quickly and normally you buy more than you need. So growing herbs is also like cilantro or basil. Those are also great things to start off and try and grow.
All really good points. Honestly, when I moved to Michigan and I found heirloom tomatoes, I thought it was the best thing ever because they don't have that in Miami. And something that I also learned when I was over here is that you have to store things in specific ways in the fridge. For example, I actually store my greens now with it's a biodegradable paper, but some people wrap their greens up with napkins. And it's quite interesting to know that even like your herbs or some other greens need water whenever it's in the fridge. And there are different ways that we can go upon being more eco-friendly. Like I use net bags to hold my produce in instead of those plastic bags. And even though there are recycling places out there, it would be best just not to have to do that and to just have those resources available. And I'm just personally curious, what do the rest of you all grow? I must imagine that you all have something growing at home.
Well, we tried to have a garden this year. It did not really work out. So we are very much looking forward to part 2 and now implementing our composting skills that I learned from this class to hopefully see if that improves the soil this year. So looking forward to some hopefully green beans and cucumbers and so on and so forth.
I personally have a lot of like leeks, like the kind of oniony alliums. I just have a lot of those growing in my apartment in water. And when I go home, pretty quick here, home is, like my parents' house. And we usually have a lot of zucchinis and cucumbers and like all of that stuff because, they can take a lot of sunlight, which is nice. We have a sunny yard.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sophie. Like, even last year, I learned that if I had the end of my green onion, I put in some water, that it would grow. So as a scientist, I actually got a ruler and I measured it every day to feel like I wasn't crazy and that it was growing. And it actually did grow. And after that, I was just like, wow, I can grow things from my scraps. And this talk really just affirmed everything that I've been experimenting with at home. Something else that I think Chanel just mentioned was about composting. I have an apartment, so composting is kind of hard for me. I know that a lot of people do that outside, and I've heard like rumors that it smells bad, and that's a lot of the reasons why people don't want to compost. But I've also heard from the scientists that there are things that you can do to prevent that smell. Do you all have any recommendations on composting with that?
Masha or Michelle, do you want to take that as far as the blend of browns and greens?
I actually have some information on composting based on browns and greens. I'm not sure about the smell and how to limit that, but I do know that if you layer your composting bin starting with some browns, which would be like mulch or like grass clippings or leaves, you start off with that and then alternate the food that you're composting on top of that brown and just repeat that process. Once you start to churn it, it'll create more of like a soil that you can use in a garden or with your plants that provides more of a natural fertilizer. I would imagine that once you start to churn and mix up all of the greens with the browns, the smell would reduce, but it is recommended with composting that you use a box that can kind of seal shut a little more rather than like a cardboard box or something.
Additionally, hopping off of what Gabby said, compost that has not enough like aeration in it will start to smell awful. So like Gabby had said, turning the compost pile to help get air into the compost is what stops the bad smell. So don't neglect it for weeks.
And I think, with like you saying that like you live in an apartment and it doesn't sound feasible, I think that's important why we need to push for policies to make things like compost pickup very accessible, just because, not everybody wants to hold a composting bin in their apartment, or some people just don't necessarily garden and they don't need it. So I think if people actually push for these larger scale composting plants, that is also a great alternative for just, collecting some smelly vegetables in your home.
That's a very good point, Masha. I truly agree with that. Even with recycling pickup too, my fiance just had to pack up the entire car with recycling because we're not going to throw it out. So it's 7:00 right now. Thank you, all of you, so much for giving this wonderful presentation. I personally loved it and I really enjoyed it. I hope everyone else did too. And everyone else who is around, please stay tuned because we'll have more talks for you from the MSU Science Festival. Take care, everyone.